I am agility. I am power.
I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Smartass.
Welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another very exciting Marvel Spider-Man 2 related video. This time, actually diving into a subject which a lot of people have been wanting me to discuss ever since the initial trailer was revealed for the game. However, given the previous two Insomniac Spidey games, it's pretty much clear to see exactly what we can expect in terms of the combat mechanics for Insomniac's interpretation of Spider-Man's fighting style. However, given that there are brand new mechanics that seem to be in place for Marvel Spider-Man 2 for both Peter and Miles, mainly in the case for the Iron Spider-like arms coming from Peter Parker, and the new Venom powers with the blue highlights emitting from Miles, there is a lot of variety that is hopefully going to take place with Marvel Spider-Man 2, and exactly how Insomniac is going to enhance the combat mechanics that we have already seen been in place for their previous Spider-Man games. However, I'm not alone discussing this topic, because today I have the one and only Comic Blast Keenan elaborating more about what exactly we are hoping to expect and what we want to see for Marvel Spider-Man 2 in regards to its combat. Thank you so much for joining me, Keenan. How you doing today?
Evan, it is so good to be on the channel. I definitely am a big fan, so it's a dream come true to be on the channel discussing this topic of all topics with you. And I'm also so excited to tell everyone on your channel that we actually did a collaboration talking about Tony Todd as Venom. That's going to be on my channel as well, so if you guys want to check that out, you're more than welcome to. I'm sure Evan will have a link somewhere for that video. Combat topics probably some of the things I'm most passionate about when it comes to talking about Marvel Spider-Man 2, because Spider-Man PS4 was a fantastic game, and in my eyes it's a masterpiece, but there also is always room for improvement with each of these games. And we got to see Insomniac actually, improve quite a bit on the combat from the first game with their transition over to Spider-Man Miles Morales. That was only probably a 2-year gap between development between those two games. So I'm curious to see, and I have high expectations on what they can improve on with Marvel Spider-Man 2 now that they have, basically 4 or 5 years in space between development for Spider-Man PS4 and Marvel Spider-Man 2. I think they're going to knock it out of the park, but like I said, I'm very passionate about this topic, so I can't wait to dive into what things we hope and expect to see from a combat perspective in this game.
I definitely fully agree with what you brought up about the combat mechanics differentiating from Peter and Miles in their own games, because even though Miles Morales was a great game, it actually wasn't a full-on sequel, but instead a spin-off game that still incorporated all the base mechanics from Spider-Man PS4 and revitalized it for Miles' character, which obviously meant making him feel more fresh in terms of his web swinging and air tricks, but also in terms of his fighting style being completely different from what we saw with Peter Parker. And in the case of Marvel Spider-Man 2, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Insomniac might expand upon the mechanics that we've already seen in their previous Spider-Man games, or if it'll be a complete 180 turnaround and be something completely different. A lot of issues that some people do seem to have with the base Spider-Man PS4 combat system, and even some aspects of Miles Morales, actually relates to the skill tree, where a lot of the moves aren't actually related to enhancing Spider-Man's combos or different types of attacks, but rather having him be more effective when fighting people either in the air, throwing objects in the environment, or simply taking out enemies quicker during stealth sections, where in this case, I definitely think adding a skill tree, which could possibly incorporate more combo maneuvers and different methods of attacks while mixing up the combat and button varieties that you have to input to take out certain enemies, will definitely add a lot more depth in comparison to the main combat that we have already seen. Even though it is still extremely enjoyable, and I thoroughly love it in its own right, I still think for Marvel Spider-Man 2, especially since we're going to be dealing with more enemy varieties, new character animations, and a lot more expansions of Peter and Miles' movesets, given that the years have gone by since their previous games, it's truly going to be a very insightful experience to see exactly how Peter and Miles' combat will differ versus what we've already seen in their previous titles.
Yeah, I think that you bringing up the button combos is such an important topic because I think that like the Arkham games really did a really good job with button combos, and that's something that Insomniac could take inspiration from. We absolutely need to have some sort of button combos in Marvel Spider-Man 2. I think that giving the user or the player the ability to be very intentional about what kind of moves they want to pull off or put to use the skills that they've unlocked is a big plus and something that's definitely needed. I'd also add in there that not only do you want really cool fighting combos, but you want to include some button combos that include some counters and ways to dodge attacks. So button combos is definitely something that I've brought up a ton in some videos of my own, and I feel like that's a great starting point when it comes to improving the combat in Marvel Spider-Man 2.
Now, there are great examples of Spider-Man and combat in a plethora of all of his previous games, but the main three that I definitely think that we should look at in the regards of Marvel Spider-Man 2 and whether or not the black suit might play a factor within the game's combat system as well if Peter or Miles ends up receiving the symbiote during some point of the game's story is actually Spider-Man Web of Shadows, Spider-Man 3, the PS3 version or Xbox 360 version, and Shattered Dimensions, where you can either look at any of the four Spideys, but of course, in regards to Symbiote Spider-Man, we're definitely going to look more so at the ultimate iteration of the character, whose main combat system primarily focused on symbiote attacks. Now, there have been obviously a lot of interpretations of how combat can be portrayed in a Spider-Man game, either more realistically, which is a great example of Spider-Man 3's main combat system, where Peter had a majority of realistic kicks, punches, and also using his webbing to subdue enemies, but nothing out of the wazoo crazy like what we obviously see in something like Shattered Dimensions for the Amazing Spider-Man, where he can make giant web fists, web maces, web hammers, and all the crazy things that we obviously know and love from the comics, which focus more on embracing that comic aesthetic instead of making it into a more realistic scenario. Which is where a game like Spider-Man Web of Shadows comes in, as well as Shattered Dimensions for the Ultimate Dimension, where, given how stylized Insomniac has already made Spider-Man's combat in the first game, and now with the Venom powers for Miles, I definitely could see them doing a hybrid of both styles, where if Peter ends up receiving the symbiote, he could have some crazy type of tendril attacks, but also make him more aggressive and violent in his combat maneuvers instead of more graceful and acrobatic like what we have already seen in Spider-Man PS4. And same thing for Miles, where he definitely has a much more youthful style in comparison to the much more veteran Peter Parker that we do have within Insomniac's world. And having the aggressive nature of the symbiote enhanced with possibly tendrils coming out to make the combat more violent or a lot more stylish compared to the more realistic type of fighting that we've already seen is definitely going to give Marvel Spider-Man 2 a leg up when compared to the other two titles.
So on that point, I actually kind of prefer the more realistic and stylized fighting, and it's something that I hope to see from a symbiote suit perspective in this game at least. I think Shattered Dimensions was probably one of the games that I enjoyed the most from a symbiote suit perspective. Specifically, I loved their rage mode within that game, and I think that that's something that they could utilize within Marvel Spider-Man 2 as well. One thing that I would bring up is actually in Spider-Man Miles Morales, there is a part of the skill tree where you can unlock this huge Venom blast when you're on your last hit. So as opposed to you taking your last hit and dying, Miles actually lets off this huge blast, taking out the enemies around him. And I think it actually restores his health to full. That's something that I could see and would like to see from Insomniac with a rage mode from the symbiote within this game. So let's say Peter is on his last hit before he dies. As opposed to him dying, you can unlock this somewhere deep in the skill tree where you would enter this rage mode and seamlessly start taking out all the surrounding enemies pretty much in a hit or two. And then he just fully gets restored in his health as well. That's just one thing from Shattered Dimensions that I would like to kind of take and adapt within this game.
Now, out of all the previous Spider-Man games that have already released, the main one that stands out amongst the rest in terms of combat is without a doubt Spider-Man Web of Shadows, where you basically feel like you're playing as two completely different characters when looking at both Red Suit Spider-Man and Black Suit Spider-Man, each with their own unique combat maneuvers and capabilities, as well as very stylish looking special moves which completely embody everything that makes both the Red Suit and Black Suit so special. Mainly in the case of Red Suit Spider-Man Web of Shadows, it definitely prioritizes webbing attacks, fast-paced strikes, and intense agility, which you can utilize frequently with the Web Strike system, which is easily one of the best combat mechanics in any Spider-Man game. But for the cases of Black Suit Spider-Man, you initially start off the game with some very aggressive kicks, punches, and elbows, which evolves later into embracing the symbiote powers and the tendrils, making crazy blades, having a symbiote go underground and use it to launch enemies into the air, and also shooting out massive symbiote tendril bursts directly from Spider-Man's chest. I don't know for sure if Insomniac is going to go that insane in terms of the Black Suit combat system if it is incorporated into Marvel's Spider-Man 2, but again, there's definitely hopefully going to be a lot more strategy involved when it comes to fighting villains within the Insomniac universe, but is also going to make the player want to explore all the possibilities that the combat might have in place for Peter Parker's red suit, the Iron Spider arms, a possible Black Suit combat system, and all of Miles' new Venom powers running completely in next gen, which is truly going to enhance the visuals and combat to new heights that weren't ever possible before within the PS4 for both of Insomniac's previous Spidey games.
Yeah, I definitely think that getting to utilize so many different ways to play different characters within this game is really going to help diversify the crimes, the combat scenarios, and the types of enemies we end up seeing in this game. You figure we're going to play as Miles Morales, we're going to have new mechanics for Peter as well with the spider arms, which I'm kind of iffy on, but I'm looking forward to seeing where they go with the spider arms within this game. And then, of course, we have the Black Suit, which I'm hoping it has a separate skill tree just for the Black Suit with different moves that you can progress through as the story progresses. Something I'd also like to see from the combat is some sort of integration between the parkour and fighting. I think things like maybe possibly wall combat, that might be a little bit tough to do because you're dealing with camera angles, but they could incorporate wall combat. You would also need some sort of enemies that actually are on walls as well if you want to incorporate that, but also adding in things like swinging around a light pole post and taking out enemies, or possibly integrating a slingshot mechanic as you kind of fly through enemies and kick them down. Stuff like that I think would help improve the game. Just finding a way to integrate parkour into this game is something that I've been passionate about on my channel, so I'm hoping that Insomniac is able to pull that off.
And based on everything that we have already seen from both Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales, it definitely seems like that the combat is already fun enough as is, but it's also going to be very intriguing to see exactly how these mechanics will hopefully evolve and expand by the time that both Peter and Miles fully flesh out their abilities within Marvel's Spider-Man 2, just like what we did with upgrading both of them with the skill trees in their previous games, but taking that to the next step within the sequel. And with all that said, everybody, that is the video that Keenan and I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching, and please let us know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think about the Marvel Spider-Man combat as is within Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales? Do you think it's fun? Do you think that there should be more combo opportunities and overall acrobatic maneuvers that Peter and Miles can utilize towards enemies? Do you think that there should be more Black Suit moves versus the current Red Suit and Miles suit that we do have within Marvel Spider-Man 2? Would you also like to see different enemy varieties that gives players a challenge to fight against? Let me know, and Keenan, all your thoughts in the comment section down below, and please go and make sure to follow, subscribe, and like to all of Keenan's social media posts and YouTube videos, because he definitely deserves every single one of your support, and definitely follow him if you are hyped for anything related to Marvel Spider-Man 2. Again, thank you so much for joining me, Keenan. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you so much, Evan, for having me on the channel. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and it's truly been an honor to talk about Spider-Man with you.
And until next time, true believers, thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy, and for more Marvel Spider-Man 2 videos like this in the future. And without further ado, peace out.